All right. Good morning, everybody. I am going to try and make sure I can speak. Oh, sorry. Making sure I am timed. All right. So I'll be looking at a monitor that's very far away, but I think we'll be okay. So today, I'll just be taking us through thinking about how we shape our own futures and imaginations, and actually through African innovation, which I take it as AI, right? You know, there is these bits and pieces of just everybody talking about AI. I will talk about it, but we really have to think about how technology actually works for us. So yeah, I'm Vukosi. I'm based at the University of Pretoria as the chair of data science there and a professor in the computer science department. I run the data science for social impact research group, and I wear many hats when it comes to AI on the African continent. So I take myself as more trying to be a community builder and community organizer in this space. So I sit on a few boards like the Partnership on AI, Lacuna Fund, and then I'm also a co-founder of an AI company called Lilapa AI. All right, so how then do we bring all of these different pieces together so that we can shape then how Africans have agency during these AI revolutions? That's the group at the university. Most of the work that we do is at the intersection of African languages and AI in itself. So through that, I think first let's lay down some ground or foundational information so that we can all interact. We're really talking about the same thing. So you will always hear these words, artificial intelligence and machine learning, sometimes very much interchangeably, but what is it? So in a classical definition, AI is an agent, exists in an environment, it takes action to achieve a goal. So going back to Mal's example, the humble South African robot sits at a corner of a street. It can change from green, orange to red. That's an action. And the goal is to control traffic. So by definition, it already is AI. You don't need to add other AI. It's a machine. It does all of these things. It exists somewhere. It takes action to achieve some goal, right? You can increase it. That's one of my daughters looking at a robot vacuum cleaner that we have at home. Right, so that robot vacuum cleaner lives in the house in a way, exists, it can move around, it can vacuum, it can try to avoid obstacles, and its goal is to clean the rooms without running out of battery. That's an AI. So both the robot, our traffic light, the robot, and the vacuum cleaner robot are both examples of AI. Now, what's machine learning? So machine learning, though, deals with how can machines learn patterns from data, right? And this is the part that becomes very important in a lot of the way that AI is done today. You work on this part of, you show examples, and then the machine learns from those examples. So let's say you're given a surface in mathematics terms. You have two data points that I give you, so you're interested in where the data point is. That's the input. And then the color is what the output is supposed to be. So I give you two data points. So one is red and one is blue. And now I ask you, I'm going to drop a new dot. Can you tell me, depending on where it lands, what color it's supposed to be? Right? You would have learned the pattern first so that you can now predict. So the simplest one, given this example, is a straight line that is equidistant between the 2 points. And in the future, if a new dot shows up that doesn't yet have a color and is on left of that line, I will predict that it's red. And if one falls onto the right, I will just predict that it's blue, right? I can increase the complexity of this. So let's say that's how our data looks like. And if it looks like that, what tends to happen is that decision boundary becomes more complex as itself. So instead of a straight line, y is equal to mx plus c, it becomes some quadratic function, and it looks like that. Right, just with that data. So in the future, anything that's above that line, I'll predict that it's blue. Anything that's below that line, I'll say predict that it's red. And yes, here I'm not talking about error. I'm just saying 100% accuracy. But you could imagine that that point here is red and that point here is blue. And this is still the best. That decision boundary is the best boundary you could have learned to take into account this data. So that is the thing. So that's kind of the basis of machine learning. You can take it like, a few a few decades from like the 1960s, and then now you're in the 2010s, and you have this deep learning. So a lot of things that have happened in the last couple of years is the compute has become much cheaper, so you can have very, very big computers, and then you can put in a lot of data, and you can build these very big models that have multiple layers instead of these simple y is equals to mx plus c. And you get to a point now where you have these systems that if any of you have a modern cell phone that you've gotten in the last 5 years, you have in your gallery that you take pictures, and in your gallery you can search and say trees, and it shows you all the pictures you've taken of trees. Why? There's been these models that are loaded onto your phone directly that were trained with millions and millions of pictures that are tagged. And then from there, they learn the patterns of saying, if you've got those pixels, that's your input data, can you then predict what's actually inside that image, right? So we've skipped maybe a year of machine learning classes, and now you can do that, right? That's what's happening. You can now do this deep learning work. So this one, what I gave you is what we call supervised learning, where you have a teacher who shows you the input and then also shows you the output, and you learn the pattern. Now, what if we don't have these outputs, these labels? You do have things here we call unsupervised learning, where you just have data and you're supposed to then do something with it, right? So with that, you can group your data into patterns to say, I've got all of this data, but it might represent all these different groupings, and inside that grouping is actually some information. So what's happened? Why machine learning? So in the past, when you were writing a computer program, somebody would sit there, think about, like, in the dog versus cat image, hey, what does a dog have? It'll have fur, it'll have paws, it'll have all those things. You build up all of these things and write a program that then says, I have to find all of these pieces, and then I'll say it's a dog. With machine learning, you feed the data. The programmer doesn't need to write those rules. You feed it the data, it learns the pattern. And that's the thing that has changed. And what's changed over the last 20 years or so is the compute cost has gotten very, very low, so you can build much, much bigger models. And there's lots more data that's available to train these models also that's at the same time. So we could then skip to something like language. So in language, what we're normally training now is these things called mass language models. One task that you can take as almost being supervised is you train the model to predict a word that is missing in a sentence. So in this example, the input is this full sentence here. The cat is eating some food. You randomly choose a word and you take it out. That's why there's that thing that's a mask. And you take it and you put it as an output instead of being an input. And now you give the model lots and lots and lots and lots of examples like this, and then it learns inside what is called a language model. It learns to predict what is the missing word in the sentence. For many of you, this is called a BERT model. Around, would it be, 2014 or so? What you would have seen is your Gmail change, and instead of just predicting the next word, it started predicting the next sentence as you were starting to type. And that's what was happening, is that they started rolling out this update using this model. So instead of just doing the single word prediction, which already people had, if you go back to your old Nokia, just on characters, it used to predict what the rest of the word as you were typing. Now you could predict the sentences. That should have been a sign for everybody that something big was coming. So this is 2014, right? What happened is then later, so to train this model, this BERT model, you just take like lots of books and Wikipedia, and you do this extracting sentences, removing a word, putting it in there. You pre-train it on a task of just predicting those words, and then you could also fine-tune it to something else. Fine-tuning it is that first it learns something about the language, and then later you can change it to say, now can you become a better spam detector? Because now you can it can process sentences and paragraphs instead of just keywords. In the past, when you were doing spam detection, you were looking for words that are bad in the email, and you would then remove that email. Now you could try, the model tries to understand the context of what's in that email, and you can fine-tune it for that. So that's like in the early 2010s. And then what happens is that there's another piece that comes in. People are working on other tasks. So the one task for patterns is, I'm going to give you pairs of questions and answers. So this is the Stanford it's called Squad, but it's a Q&A. So it's questions and answer data set. So it's all these questions, hundreds of thousands of questions with connected answers. So you've taken that model that you pre-trained on the general, fill in the missing word. Now you say, I'm going to fine-tune it. What am I going to fine-tune it on? On questions and answer data set. right? So that's the next part. So there's a lot of these data sets. There's Trivia QA. This is Alpaca. This gives you an example like, oh, give me 3 tips for staying healthy. That's my input. The output, it gives a eat a balanced diet, exercise regularly, get enough sleep. And now you're training the model to recognize those second patterns, right? So, but this wasn't good enough. I think, where were we? Late 2010s. For example, Microsoft releases a Twitter bot called Tay. It goes online, it learns from the interactions that it gets on Twitter at the time, and very quickly goes off the rails and starts saying very racist things and all those things because people started feeding it all of this negative information. Unfortunately, Elon Musk had to relearn that lesson that we already knew from like the 2019s. All right, in this part, that if you let systems just go on, most of the internet is a bad place. And as such, you learn very bad things. So what happened is then if we go to fast forward to 2020, 2021, in about June or so, this paper comes out called Instruct GPT. And what it was saying is, okay, so now you're going to pre-train on the missing word data set. You're going to fine-tune on questions and answers. And then finally, you're going to take in human feedback. So somebody is going to sit there, the machine's going to get questions and answers. It's going to respond with its predicted answer. And then there's a human who then says, this answer is good or it's bad. So now it's taking into account the preferences of what the humans are. And this should also ring more alarm bells. The more we try to fix problems, the other problems come in. Why? Now, even more, who the designer is impacts how the system works. All right, ultimately, who then chooses whether a response is good or not comes down to this designer. But then this was the last kind of magic that happened before November 30th, 2021. What happened on November 30th, 2021? Yeah, ChatGPT comes out. Right, but I remember we saw this paper and we were like, oh, yeah, something big is about to happen. And a few months later, ChatGPT comes out. All right, because now you had all of these kind of, ingredients that one of the things that you can do is now have systems that, yes, look like they're human, they're not. I've just showed you the whole recipe of building your own ChatGPT, right, from what is actually going on, but it's now going to look like, oh, this thing thinks, or it looks like it thinks, it looks like it reasons, and I can ask it questions and it responds, but it's not. It's all putting all these pieces together. But there's challenges here. We're just mostly talking about English, right? So why do we think about like other languages? So we tend to think about these low resource languages. Well, what are low resource languages? You have millions and millions of speakers, but they don't have data, whether it's speech, text, or etc. Or they don't have like tools like grammar, dictionaries, those types of things. So many people, I ask this question, how many people in a room outside English or Afrikaans have a dictionary, digital dictionary on their phone in the language that they grew up with? Nobody. All right, so you don't have these tools that are available in these spaces. So what tends to happen is that very few languages in this taxonomy, English, Spanish, German, Japanese, and French, are taken as these winners, and then everything else, like mostly 97% of the world's languages, are taken as being lower than that. They don't have resources in these spaces. So one way to think about this is also through Wikipedia. So that's the sizes of Wikipedia. They're a bit dated now. They've changed a little bit. But English Wikipedia now has 7 million plus articles that are written in English. Right? Then on the African continent, the closest is Egyptian Arabic, which is 1.6 million. If I keep on going here, there's Yoruba, 33,000. isiZulu, only 11,000. Southern Sotho, 949. I think Setswana used to be at 600. Shizonga used to be at 300. Ndebele didn't have a Wikipedia until like about 18 months ago, and I think they're still at 200 articles. So remember, to train the machine, you need a lot of data to first train it on that one task, and then you can fine-tune it later. That first data, that's what you're dealing with. So if English has 7 million, and then our languages are way, way at the bottom there, you cannot make something from nothing. Right. It's just an impossibility. You need to have a foundation that you build on. And now we're showing that, oh, this data, and here I'm using language as an example, but this tends to transfer to many, many things. There might be computer vision, the systems that use imaging. It might be information about food systems, all of those. It tends to be that their data is very low. So just assuming that, oh, no, it's okay, the AI will resolve itself is not a good assumption to make. That data isn't there. Then there's the current appetite, just seeing my time, okay, I have to speed up a bit, of compute and data, right? So we talked about the data, there's problems, there's this Gen AI thing, but we need to learn from the past, things are very similar, right? So this won't be the last time you have AI revolutions. You can go back to the 1960s, and every few years, oh, AI, it's here, it's going to change everything, and we've seen it. And even me, being as young as I am, I've seen the revolutions come and go in these spaces. So this is not the first one. Nobody, like I know everybody's think, oh, AI is like, the first time. No, it's happened many, many times. We have boom and bust years. We're probably right now in the kind of the late days of the latest boom. I know people might not feel that, but we see that a lot. There's a lot of layoffs that are happening on the west coast of the US because it's really getting to a point where how much more can you extract out of these systems? But to understand this, this is, for example, a plot of how many academic papers were put on arXiv. arXiv is this place, typically for us, before, once you finish a paper and you submit it somewhere for a journal or a conference, and then it gets accepted, you make paper available also on arXiv. It's a big traditional thing within machine learning. Now, though, because of what's changed in the last few years, people, as soon as the paper is finished writing it, they just upload it there so that you can just say, I had this idea first. But you can see there that the amount of papers, almost for the last 15 to 20 years, have exponentially been growing. So I'm trying to explain to you, this is not new. Right, if you go back 5 years ago, there was another revolution in AI. 5 years before that, there was another revolution in AI. It's just that now, because it's Gen AI, you get access to the tools as opposed to being these tools that are behind the scenes and then you don't see. But we don't have data. What is the other challenge? Compute. So to build these models, you need very, very big GPUs. These are graphical processing units. They use them to calculate those decision boundaries, as I said, of these very big models. And there's been a very marked shift of who has this compute. So here is a picture of A100 GPUs. These are like, iPhone 13s to the current iPhone 16s of GPUs. And you could see already there was a picture going on where Meta, Tesla, a few like private companies had most of the compute. There were some national, the yellow ones there are national HPCs. So here in Cape Town, for example, we have the CHPC, Center for High Performance Computing. Might have some of these, they don't, but they should. But the picture changes once you move to H100s. H100s are maybe the iPhone 15s to the iPhone 16s. The iPhone 16s right now are H200s. Each of these GPUs costs about probably $30-something thousand. Right? So if their Meta publicly has declared they have 350,000 of those. Right? You can make some calculations. So they have 350,000 of these $33,000 machines. Right? And you still need to cool them. They run very hot. They use a lot of electricity. They're typically cooled with either water or refrigerants, so they're not good for the environment. And now people like X, for example, go into cities and they put in these supercomputer centers and they don't tell the citizens of those cities that they're putting these things in there. What you find out is that, like, if they have to switch off somebody's electricity, they switch off the electricity of the people instead of the machines. Or the water even. So there's a lot of people complaining about these types of things. Another one that I just got, I think the Minister of Science and Technology earlier this week said that the whole budget for like their new big technology spend over the last 3 years or so has been 480 million rand. Right, so that puts us at what, divided by 20, okay, now I can't, 480, what, 100, no, 20-something million dollars, right? Just Facebook buying these GPUs is more than our basic science budget towards technology. So countries cannot compete with the big tech companies on the compute, and now we also have a problem of the data on the African continent. Right. This is a major, major thing. I haven't even talked about the researchers. You need the researchers to be able to do the experiments on these things, and then you need all the administrators who have to keep up all of these supercomputing centers. So it is a kind of a very big mountain to climb. And as was said, I think going back to the original, the amount of data that's available, this is just of language. After a study, I think that happened 2 years ago, about how much data in the research papers that talk about languages, English made up 53%, and then the African languages, when they added them all together, was 0.0199%. All right, so English had 2,650 times more data in these space. So people make it's also very harder to build systems for our languages, right? But this is not something that's by random or by mistake. On one part, we have these legacies of colonialism and empire that have brought us to this point of how language has developed and is still having challenges of development. And also at the same time, the resources that are there. There's some languages that most of the content that's available is connected to some religion. So it's not general written text in these spaces. So this becomes a problem. And now, the more we wait to deal with these challenges, the more expensive it becomes to deal with them. So you keep on kicking the can down the road, going like, no, we can't do that now. We have these other things that society wants us to fix, so we won't deal with the languages. And South Africa, I think policies go back to 1993. We just keep on kicking it. But what's happening is that it's like having a high interest credit card or loan. The more you wait, the bigger the debt becomes. And you're just going to get to a point where like, I'm bankrupt, let's leave it. We will all just deal with one of those winner languages. We don't want to engage with our local languages anymore. And that's the thing that's happening kind of right now. So now, the question I ask is, Gen AI adding to the credit amount, or is it increasing the interest rate? Because that's what's happening. It's one of the two. Both of them are bad options. But that's what's happening at the moment, right? And low resource languages is not this thing of just, no, it's okay, we'll just fix it technically. It is not happening. It is very, very hard. The reason we have like a team of 50 people in our university working on these things, oh, we wish it was just a technical problem. It's people problem. You're always engaging with them, trying to figure out what's going on. So we all like technical challenges, and I think people here, especially if you talk about food systems, you understand. You can say, oh, we just need the water, we need the seeds, we need the logistics. No. Problems are, people are the challenge and the solution. How do you figure that out? And the biggest thing is that you're in this space between. So it's adaptive. You need to figure out when really something is just technical and most of the things are not. There are these interactions that happen between people and technical systems, and where then do you come up with ways to serve them. So within food systems, some ideas. So there's a simple equation here. So you're going to need data. You're going to build some AI models, and that's when you can get to these actionable insights or interesting applications that you can use on the other side. African data models researchers, are missing or underutilized in this equation, right? We don't have the data. It's very hard. If there are some AI models, are they being used? Do people even know about them? Those types of things. So example one, spread the knowledge. This is some work we were doing in our lab, led by, then was a master's student, now she's a PhD student, on can you build FAQ systems that are automated for farmers, small-scale farmers. In this case, it was initially through a project with Makerere University in Uganda. But then basically, can you get to a point where people have access to a bot, a WhatsApp bot, they can ask questions in isiZulu, isiXhosa, and get responses in isiZulu and isiXhosa? And what's the AI that all comes in the background to be able to do that? So Fiskani's work was on that in that area, and then it provides this thing of filling in these information gaps, fights misinformation in these spaces, those types of things, right? And it's a whole kind of system that had to be designed, and then at the end, what you want it to be, maybe it's a WhatsApp channel that farmers have access to, and you can be low cost, that you don't need a very fancy phone or all those things, and then that can engage. One of the things that's a challenge is still that you're using text. I don't know how many people have read technical content in isiZulu or isiXhosa or Setswana or Sesotho. It's very hard. once you have to read like technical written thing. So one of the things now that people are really starting to look at is looking at text to speech and speech to text, and then getting people that people can just speak naturally, and then also get a response they can listen to and understand. Right. Example 2, Measure Well, from a more recent friend and who apparently is also known in this network. This is Be Grateful with Lita Flora at Yolanda Methvin, who's been working on this. And here what they're trying to do is saying, hey, how do we bring technology to beekeepers across the country? And they really want to, again, think about the food system and how you enhance all these different pieces of the food system and then bring in agri-tech in different spaces. So at the moment, what they're working on is this, this app called Be Grateful. And what it does is that, yes, you log in, you're a beekeeper, and if you need to do surveys or you need to do kind of productivity estimates on there, you want to report, and with that reporting, you can assist you in getting contracts, right, to buy what's coming out of your, in this case, your harvest. So the AI innovation, they are currently looking at how then they can do these surveys using speech recognition. So that now the beekeeper can go around their hives and speak. Every time they get to a hive, they can just say, okay, given the questions I'm supposed to answer, I can now speak and describe what is going on with hive 1, with hive 2, with hive 3, with hive 4. And in the background, the AI is transcribing everything that they're saying and then filling in a form. And then that form then is used as the record of what was going on that day or during that period. And being able to enable that is completely done in a local language. Right, so that to reduce that thing. And then it has that impact. And here, they're looking at the moment, they're evaluating one of the systems we have at Lelapa, at our company, to do this. Okay, I'm now over, but I'll have, yeah. Then how do you expand the foundations? So one, data is out there. Use it. At Lacuna Fund, so I said I was on the board of that organization. So we raised about $20 million to allow people to be able to apply and then create new data for AI that specifically looks at the global majority or global south. And in this case, for Africa, there's a lot of new data that has to do with climate and agriculture that wasn't there before. So if you go there, you'll have things like drone-based crop monitoring in Ghana and Uganda, pest disease imagery, community land use. All of this data is there. And how then does it get actually embedded into systems that assist people in one way or another? And then some people might also use that data for AI. Remember, we don't want to build this data just because we want to feed the AI, but it becomes useful information for many, many people. So those data sets are there. I think for agriculture, there's probably more than 10. I think I saw for climate, there's like 4, and there's more that are coming in the future, coming through the grantees that we funded through Lacuna Fund. Okay. So to finish off, connected to some of the comments that were made at the beginning, we also need to think about building very differently. There's a lot of the AI ecospace that people don't see that is really very negative towards society. One is thinking about how we make sure that the people who are now, you don't want to be forced just to say, let's create data, because the only way to be represented is that you must do these data jobs, and they're some of the worst jobs in these spaces because they typically tend to underpay, they don't have much protections for some of these things, and then at the same time, because you just only have the data, just like you're the person who had the gold under your house, and you don't have the facilities to actually dig it out, refine it, and sell it, you get the smallest amount in that ecosystem. So here, for example, is thinking about how then do we do equitable licensing, that communities can create data and also then benefit from that data being used in other applications. So one was at the University of Pretoria through the Data Science Law Lab, creating of a new license called the Nuolote Obodo Open Data License, or Noodle, and it then goes into this benefit sharing bits of how do you then, if somebody takes the data, uses it for something, and then they do actually get a benefit out of that, that benefit accrues back to the communities that have created the data. At Lelapa, we have the Setu license that we also created in parallel that also does a similar thing. They just have mechanisms that are slightly different. Noodle saying anybody who's who's not from a developing country has to accrue back those benefits, and then Setu saying no, specifically if you're not African, benefits have to accrue back to whoever created this data. We create new data sets at our lab. Here's Marito, it's a new terminology database. There are these terminology databases. You can find them in agriculture. They're just not easily machine readable that you can embed them into other systems. So we worked for the last 3 years to now take all of these kind of government funded spaces, and if you go to the Marito website, you can find this data now. It's easy. You can embed them if you want to, say, hey, I'm writing and I want to write in Xhosa. Now you have access to the kind of bilingual terminology list that you can then use in lots of different topics as well. At the university also, we've been working on this project for the last 2 years. The thing that doesn't really make me sleep, collecting 3,000 hours of speech. I know, almost done. 1 more minute and yeah. 3,000 hours of speech in 7 South African languages. Why is this hard? Think about it that if you want the highest quality recording, so you do the speech and then the transcripts, and then you can build the models that do the speech to text, right? Now, if you want the highest quality, you want to maximize that one person only records themselves for an hour. So that's 3,000 people you have to recruit. They can have whatever device that they have. They shouldn't have too much background noise. They shouldn't have, and they must do it within time. So it's been like 2 years of crazy sprint to get through this. We've released the first 250 hours in the last 2 weeks or so of isiZulu. It will be done by the end of this month. We'll have 500 hours of isiZulu, 500 hours of isiXhosa, 500 hours of Sesotho. And then the rest will release in the next, by the end of August, we should have the rest of that 3,000 languages also being available. And then from there, again, in a license that's open, but then seeing what people are going to then be able to build in these systems where you're representing 7 languages. But this is just a South African version. There's a Kenyan one that's in parallel, and there's also a Nigerian one that's in parallel, and there's another one in Ethiopia. So at the end, we're going to be at over, I think, 12,000 hours of new data that becomes available for people to be able to build tools in these spaces. So why do I then say tools? How do you get them into people's hands? Universities are really bad at this. So that's why on one part we started Lelapa. Lelapa is an AI research company. And there is how do we build these technologies locally and then deploy them and get other people to use. So I gave that example of the Be Grateful app that it's using Lelapa systems. And inside there, it's just to go in and say, we want to get to those 2 billion people in their languages. This is just a part of a opportunity we need to get into and really serve most of the majority of the world in these spaces. So how then do you build real world AI? Language is one of the foundations that you need to kind of get to, and we have a system called Bulabula. It can do transcriptions, translations, and then converse with people in those languages currently on the platform. And then you can find, lelapa.ai. And we also built the first African large language model. Ours was a small language model to build more efficient, and we even had a competition for people to even make it smaller while keeping the performance as high as possible. Ooh, am I too far? And last, to go back to one of the sponsors, the deep learning Indaba, you've got the technical, you've got all these pieces that have to come together. That's in my last, almost 10 years of my life. But now you need to have built very differently in some ways, and you need community. So we started the deep learning Indaba to build a new community that worked on AI locally with the vision of, at that time in 2017 when we started, Africans becoming critical contributors, owners, and shapers, when we said of the coming advances. Because we were seeing that there was going to be an acceleration, but we didn't think that the African continent was ready. So with the Indaba, we've gone on. The first Indaba was at Vets with about 300 people. The last one last year was in Senegal in Dakar, 600 people. This year's one is going to be in Kigali in Rwanda with 1,000 people. We're coming for that. But we also have the Indaba X systems, which are smaller, smaller conferences that run for a little bit shorter. This year's one in South Africa, Indaba X South Africa, was in Stellenbosch last week. And we've now gotten to a point where we have, I think, 50 Indaba X's. So almost every week of a year, there's an Indaba X happening somewhere in the world. I think Indaba X Nigeria is happening this week. Right, of people, researchers getting together and working in these kind of spaces. And because we can build very differently, you can see like last year, for example, 600 participants, 50% women. right, who are working on AI across there, and then 200 travel grants, especially for a lot of students to get there. This year there's 400 travel grants to get students there, and we're always looking for partnerships and sponsors in these spaces. I will skip. Then lastly, at the university, we started a new institute on data science and AI to, like, yes, there's stuff I can do in language, but there's all these other spaces. How do we recreate an environment that the other spaces can be taken care of too? So that's been great building this as well, and we hope to have some nice announcements in the next week or two in those areas. So thanks to all of our collaborators and people that we work with. You are not an island in these spaces. It's impossible to do the work that we do. And then also thanks to all of our supporters in terms of sponsors who sponsor the work that we do. And yeah, I will stop there. So thank you. Okay, sure.